Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today, spending this really beautiful day with us at Women in Their Work. My name is Paloma Mayorga. I am an artist and curator based here in Austin. My personal work deals with investigating ancestral plant knowledge and ways in which wisdom about the natural world is passed down through generations and shared with our community. So you can imagine how excited I was whenever Diane, our programming director here at Women in Their Work, invited me to moderate this panel. I'm excited to be here today with Andrea DeLong-Amaya, who oversees the Lady Bird Johnson's Wildflower Center's Gardens and nursery programs, and is the author of the Texas Native Plant Primer, 225 Plants for an Earth-Friendly Garden. Bindu Nicholson, y'all want to wave if you can. A landscape designer, gardener, and nature educator at Men Collaborative, an urban planning and landscape architecture firm with locations across the U.S. Marsha Riti, a self-described plant nerd, native plant nerd, artist, children's book illustrator, and landscape educator and specialist at the Elizabeth May Museum. And Elona Rose, a plant specialist and head of garden maintenance for Lattice Studio, a woman-owned and operated landscape architecture and design studio here in Austin. Thank you all so much for being here today to share your perspective about gardens and your expertise with our community. Before we go around to do more in-depth introductions, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land that has been stewarded by the Sana, Tonkawa, Huahuitecan, Liban Apache, Comanche, and Humanos nations on Turtle Island. More locally, our backdrop for today's conversation is the Allegorical Gardens by Pakistani artist Aisha Imdad, who is here with us today. And thank you for providing this beautiful setting for us to talk about gardens and nature. I'll go down our line here and ask the panelists to just introduce yourselves, how you came to do the work that you're doing with gardens and nature.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me all right? So I'm Andrea DeLong-Amaya, and I have been a passionate naturalist since I was a child. I grew up in a rural trailer park in Michigan, and I ended up in Texas when I was 7. We moved to Austin, so I've been in Austin most of my life. I grew up here. And I just, it was either going to be working at a bakery, doing coffee, or working in a plant nursery, and I'm not a morning person, so and somehow I ended up at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. I've been there since the 1900s. Can't believe how time flies. I love it there. It's really right up my alley to be working with native plants in particular. I mean, I love all plants, but I do have a particular passion for native plants and respecting our ecological heritage and trying to really, I mean, there's so many native plants that we're not familiar with for horticulture purposes. And so there's still a lot of discovery and unlocking those secrets. I love the combination of art and science and indoors and outdoors, control and relinquish. So, you know, it's a nice balance of everything. So yeah, there you go. Marsha.
Oh, Marsha.
Hi, my name is Marsha Riti, and I came into this very similarly to how you did, Andrea. I grew up on a dirt road in a double-wide trailer, and I was there till I was like 21 years old, and I spent a tremendous amount of time outside being around the plants. I grew up in a very, very rural environment and on the outskirts of Houston. And so that landscape is piney woods and Gulf Coast prairie, a little bit of both, mostly like Gulf Coast prairie where I existed. And the landscape and the plants out there really impressed me to such a degree that like I hold that space in my heart very deeply. And so when I came to Austin, it felt very otherworldly. not like how I grew up, but the longer I spend here, the more I realize that the plant community and the people were just so welcoming and very similar to where I grew up. And being at the Elizabeth May Museum, the landscape there is actually so similar to where I grew up. I could see how Elizabeth May herself, because she resided at one point very close to where I grew up in Imdad. And that landscape is very much like, you know, at the May where it exists now. And it's prairie, it's beautiful, and it really speaks to me deeply.
Thank you. Elona.
Hey, I'm Elona Rose. I am the head of maintenance and plant care specialist for Lattice Studio. We're a design build firm, woman owned, and we're actually office right across the street from here. I am probably the raccoon of the group. I came into this very untrained and learned as I went. I'm from Austin. I grew up in South Austin and left a bunch of times, but always came back. This was the landscape that was the most familiar to me. And I was raised largely outdoors and was eating wild grapes till my tongue hurt as a child and digging up my parents' flower and vegetable gardens, much to their chagrin. So you would be surprised how much just being outdoors teaches you the names of things, what you can eat, what you can't eat, where you should, what you should touch, what you shouldn't. And you just absorb knowledge as you go without ever training to be any particular way in the outdoors. And working in the field has taught me a lot as well. At this point, I end up doing a lot of the hand drawing, the old school drawing for our landscape design build firm. And one of our owners is a landscape architect. And so she formulates big pictures and then I do raccoon sketches and point her towards things that may or may not survive.
Thank you. Bindu.
Yes, hi, I'm Bindu Nicholson. And when I think about how I came to the work that I do today, I think about design in general and how I believe that the design of our surroundings are really important to how we find belonging in a place and important to our comfortability and our safety. And I'm really kind of sensitive to that. And so I remember growing up in an apartment and my mom making our home her own with the means that she had through things like adding colorful fabric all over the wall or even just like rearranging the furniture in our living room and our bathroom and our kitchen all the time. And so it always felt like design was kind of an inevitable thing that I would connect to in my career. And I'm also a lover of the outdoors and exploring and venturing outside. And so landscape design felt very fitting. I also have called many different places home. I grew up on the Big Island of Hawaii, and that has very much influenced my sense of comfort in lush environments, being around them. And I also spent time in my adulthood in Philadelphia, a city where I lived. There really wasn't much access to street trees and to parks and gardens. And then I lived in a suburb of Boston, in Wellesley, where I had immense privilege and access to beautiful gardens and conservation areas. So I saw this disconnect that because of race and power and wealth, class, it changed your access to green spaces. And so I really wanted to be a part of that. And then I guess to go quickly into my background, I am trained in ecological landscape design and sustainable planning. And I work at Min Collaborative here, landscape architecture and urban planning firm. And we work with communities to create vision plans for how they want their communities to look like. And what's really important in that work is making sure that we are putting community engagement at the forefront, making sure that people have a say in what their neighborhoods look like. Yeah, so that's long, but that's everything.
Amazing, thank you so much. And again, thank you all for being here to share your expertise in these different fields. I feel like a lot of us like don't come with like necessarily like formal training unless like, we're doing like work in it, like in having to do with nature and gardens. So I identify a lot with like just kind of like learning as you go, and the work that I do is about that. It's like, how are we passing on this knowledge to other people if like this knowledge is kind of like broken because, or like the passing down of the knowledge gets broken because of like migration or grandparents passing away or all the things. It's like, what are we doing to like continue sharing and like passing that information to help people connect with nature? So with that said, I wanted to call a little or like attention back to the exhibition, the Allegorical Gardens. So Aisha features elements from different gardens, including contemporary ones such as like the Monet Pond and the Denver Botanical Garden, historical Mughal gardens like the Enchanted Shamilar Garden in Lahore, Pakistan, built in the 17th century, and mythical ones like the 10 Miles Peach Blossoms Grove, inspired by Chinese mythology. And in seeing how she's bringing different elements of like the contemporary, historical, and mythical ones to design like her gardens, I was thinking a lot about garden design, of course. Let me see, where am I in my notes? Yeah, so I wanted to begin today's conversation talking about garden design with you all. But as we move along in the conversation, I will ask that the audience hold your questions until the end. We'll have a moment for y'all to engage with the panelists. So yeah, saying that, and then so my first question is actually for Marsha. And Marsha, in your work overseeing the grounds of the Elizabeth May Museum, how do you think about gardens and garden design?
Thank you for asking that question. I think in a big picture, and so I look at the grounds and there's these two like ways to think about the way that you approach work. There is, and people who work in tech are more used to these terms. There's waterfall, where you think about all the steps that need to happen in a project, and then you line them all up, and then you go through those steps sequentially one by one. And then there's agile, where you are working in like response to what you see, and it's very agile. And I'm much more about this kind of meld between the two, because you can think about the weather and you've got fall, summer, and then you've got fall and spring, and then summer, and my timing is terrible, but yeah, so like you can like tell the seasons, and then you base your work on those seasons, but then you also have to look at the landscape, and you need to respond very quickly to what you see in that landscape and what is happening within it. And so if I have plants that are popping up that are problematic that I need to deal with right now, then I need to deal with those things, even if my plan is already set up to do another task because of like, it being like a specific time of year. So that's how I manage my the landscape at the May. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And I will say, I'm addressing the questions to individual panelists, but if anyone else wants to contribute something to the topic that we're talking about, you're welcome to. And yes, that does answer my question. I think there's so many different ways of like thinking about garden and garden design. We were just talking about like the etymology of the word garden, which is a German word, and it refers to like an enclosed space, but thinking of like the Nay, it's not an enclosed space necessarily aside from the streets. And we were talking a little bit about that before too, like that it's not like your conventional garden, and sometimes people don't know how to like approach it.
Yeah. So the feedback that I've actually gotten from like fellow neighbors is that when they walk like around the Nay, they don't know exactly like what to make of it, because it's not a conventional garden. Like how a conventional garden, one would think that it would be hemmed in by like bushes, or it would have like hardscaping that really like kind of defines that space. Whereas like our garden it's still a garden, but it is much more naturalized. There are things that are happening within it that, I don't have full control over, and I am perfectly fine with that. It is a more natural space, but because I am tending it, I consider that to still be gardening. It's a type of garden. And I would consider it to be like very similar to how, people who existed on this land before European settlers came, the way that they related to the land, that they were gardening, they were tending the land, even though the European settlers, the colonizers, when they came, they didn't view that as tending. They didn't see that as like something that was intentional, but they absolutely were like, take burns, when indigenous tribes were burning like specific like pieces of land in order to encourage like fresh spring growth. So the buffalo would come back in. Like they were tending the land, they were gardening. That's a type of gardening. And that's the ethos that I believe in, that as long as you're like tending the land, that is gardening.
I think that leads to the whole question of what is a garden? And I think that it's, in my mind, it's a very imprecise, it's not a very clearly defined thing. And I would say the way I think of a garden would be any space that's cultivated. But what does cultivation mean? There's different levels of cultivation. And I think that goes back to your question about design. Obviously, how you design, how you approach the design process is going to depend on what you're wanting to achieve from that landscape, or what kind of interaction you want to have with the landscape. It's not just a one-way thing. We're not doing something to the landscape, we're interacting with it. And I think listening to what your goals are, as well as what the land wants, that's how you would look at the bigger picture of garden design and whatever garden is. A landscape restoration, I would argue, is also gardening, it's just at a different scale.
Yeah.
Kind of following that line, like, do you think, and again, this is for anyone on the panel, do y'all think that gardens have to have like a purpose, or you have to have like goals, in order to call it gardening, or?
Just to kind of respond back to what I was saying a minute ago, I think that is what makes it a garden. It's like if you want to do something, that is your goal. You're not going to go out there and just start messing around without some kind of goal, whether it's therapy or food or beauty or whatever it is. You have in your mind what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you might be, I don't know, winnowing seeds from, I don't know, make it cooking or whatever.
Thank you. That kind of like leads me into my next question, actually, which is for Elona. In working with like private and public projects, because you work a lot with like hospitality, like creating gardens for hospitality, right? And so I guess that's kind of like the goal and the purpose of like these designs. But I'm wondering if like you see any like trends happening in that side.
Gosh, yes, of course, always. There's always trends. I was shocked in my first couple of years of working in the plant industry, how there are plants that get bad reputations, and there are plants that are passé. And there are plenty of plants that I would never choose for real logistical reasons, like they're invasive or they're not adapted to this climate. But there's a whole host of other plants that people get grouchy if you choose just because they're not cool anymore. I'll give you a couple of examples. Cast iron plant is one of them. Yes, invasive, but also not cool anymore. Nandina is one of them. Yes, invasive, also not cool anymore. Anybody with Nandina outside their house just assumes that no renovations have been done. And so it blew my mind that it was possible for a plant to be an indicator in the same way fashion is an indicator of people's lifestyle choices, but that is absolutely the case. Current trends I'm seeing is green on white or green on green gardens. And I think that the trend of like the silvery blue foliage is starting to fade a little bit. Like people are gravitating more toward green on green rather than the silvery blues. And Santa Barbara is the inspiration for every rich person's garden, which is understandable because it's freaking amazing and anything is possible there and it's gorgeous. And because of the way Santa Barbara gardens have been cultivated, a lot of people are coming to Austin looking for things that like wisp or move in the wind, which is a really interesting characterization, like a requirement for a plant. We see a lot of challenges of people who live in high rises who want green space within their high rises, and especially on high rise balconies, because in a way that was never true before, downtown Austin has become a wind tunnel because of the large construction, and people love exactly the tropical, lush, abundant vibe that you were talking about, Bindu, and that isn't possible when it's getting shredded by 70-mile-an-hour wind tunnel winds and subjected to climate change freezes in central Texas, but also 115-degree roasting heat. So finding workarounds, finding clever dupes is a large part of my job.
It's really interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend who also works for a landscape design company, and her company works with the city of Austin to create like these large green spaces for the public. And she was mentioning that she sees this like gap in the industry where you have these like beautifully designed spaces. A lot of them are taking like, I guess, looking at non-invasive species and I guess also native to the area to like help with the pollinators and wildlife. But there is a lack of, I don't know, like informed stewardship of the land. So people will hire companies that just kind of, she calls it like the mow and blow sort of thing, which like, I mean, you all are nodding, that's a new term for me. But yeah, so it's like people are just coming in and like, and doing like I guess like cleaning up of the area, but not necessarily tending to the land. And so, yeah, I'm just with these trends in mind, like, are people like the making a plant not cool? Is it because it's invasive? Are people like becoming a little bit more attuned to like what are cool plants because of like their sustainability in mind?
I wish that were true. In my experience, it is not that.
Okay.
In my experience, it's more that a plant was very popular in a certain era, or popular in combination with a certain style of design. And once that style of design or that era becomes passé, the plant becomes passé along with it. Another great example for an interior plant is like the corn plant. Sansevieria is another one. As soon as Hobby Lobby started selling plastic Sansevieria, nobody wanted them in their houses anymore. And plastic one. So easy. Exactly. Right. So yeah, I think that it has more to do with fashion trends and people's idea of what they think they want to see without having to be directly involved with it than it does. And I think that you're absolutely correct about there being a huge void for landscape maintainers, skilled gardeners. And what we're finding is that mow and blows are excellent, but they're the custodians. And you also need a maintenance person to keep a building running. So similarly with especially exterior landscapes, you need a custodian, but you also need a maintenance person. And it's a thankless job to keep things alive or call it when to bed. And somebody's got to do it. So if anybody is thinking about getting into the landscape industry, there's a big void in that part.
Well, and I think there's also, I guess, like a lack of mentorship in that, right? So it's like, I mean, not that there isn't mentorship. There's like work that you're doing at the Wildflower Center, for instance, that is about mentorship and like, yeah, just people learning like how to take care of plants and which plants are like better for the type of garden that you have. I think that I always see like a lack of mentorship in like different areas. And I'm wondering if y'all have any thoughts about that specifically. And maybe Andrea, we can begin with the work that you do at the Wildflower Center. Like, how are you incorporating like mentorship into the sustainability of gardening?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a real lack, and horticulture is coming up in the profession, and we would love to see that change. I'm not sure why that's happening, and maybe you have some insights on that. One of the things that is exciting to me about my position is seeing our waves of volunteers that are coming through, and they're coming to volunteer for different reasons. It may be social, it may be just, they love gardening, but they also oftentimes want to know what we're doing at different times of the year so that they know what to do in their own home landscapes. So that's another form of mentoring. And I've also been really thrilled with the staff that I have right now, and have had really over time that we have a lot of mostly young women, not always, but they're all very dedicated and passionate, and it's really fun to see the discovery. And one of the best things about working at the Wildflower Center is, something starts blooming today and everybody starts talking about it. And so, it's a telephone game, and so we can all share that. It's a nice community.
And you do a really good job with social media and like sharing those that you're like, oh, this is blooming. Oh, the horned owl is back. Oh, like it's really lovely.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to plug a series of classes that y'all do at the Wildflower Center. They actually teach classes there. It's like native plant gardening, I believe, like kind of 101 kind of stuff.
I do some of those, yes.
They're going to be amazing if she's teaching us. Another thing that I'm going to plug is I'm part of CAMP, Capillary Master Naturalists. In fact, our president is here, Chuck. He's amazing. He actually works for Austin Parks Foundation too. As a recent CAM grad, I graduated fall of 2024. You learn a lot about both plants, native and invasive, and but you also learn about all the different systems within our local ecosystem, the waterways, how weather works, insects, even stuff about anthropology. So if anybody's interested in learning more in-depth knowledge that is plant-based and also place-based, that is an excellent place to start. It's Capital Area Master Naturalists.
Thank you. And we have some volunteers from Capital Area Master Naturalists here today to help us with the plant swap later, to help us identify any potential invasive species that we might be sharing. Because it's always good to know, hey, maybe don't put that in the garden, but maybe, I don't know, is it okay to keep it indoors? Or should we just do away with them? I don't know. But maybe we can talk about it with the volunteers later too. I think it's amazing that there's all of these different nature groups, and I have a handout for people later during the plant swap if y'all want to learn more about different groups if you're wanting to become involved. But it's this relationship with nature. I think some of us maybe are naturally attracted to that, to develop a relationship with nature. But then there's also so many people that are not, and they miss out on just understanding the place that they're living in, and just feeling feeling connected with this planet that we're on. And so Bindu, my next question is for you. And what sort of things have you done through the work that you're doing? Because you've also you've worked with different communities in different parts of the United States, and I'm interested from your perspective, what sort of things have you done to help people with their relationship with nature?
Yeah, sure. Speaking to connecting people with the outdoors, there's definitely a challenge in our lives with how busy they can be with the 9-to-5 grind, and addiction to screens, to traffic, staying in traffic here in Austin, that we don't spend a lot of time in nature. And the work that I did as a nature educator at Wellesley College for a couple of years, I really believed in engaging people in meaningful and intentional ways to the natural world, in community with each other. And so I worked with college students who spent a lot of their times outdoors, and just getting them to slow down and pay more attention and be more curious. And the campus that I was at was like a park. It was designed like a park, and so it was very beautiful. And so it made it, it was advantageous to getting people outside and not being as afraid and fearful related to being in the outdoors. And so some of the work that I was doing included things like foraging for acorns and making acorn pancakes with students, or even doing that with crab apples, getting crab apples and making crab apple cake. And one of my favorite things about the work that I did, I have a background in English. I majored in English, and I did a lot of creative writing with these students. And so we would write collaborative poetry together, or I would have them go on sit spots on Fridays and just spend time in a specific special place and observe, and then come back and share, reflect about that. And so over time during this work, I grew to notice just how comfortable they became with each other, with the natural world, and even just like with themselves. I remember this one student during like the first day of the program I was running, we were like sitting in a circle underneath a willow tree, so loud, very aesthetic and just fun. And she had said to me, "Bindu, is this therapy?" And I didn't say anything back, but I just will always remember that. And in connecting it back to just landscape design, one thing in my approach is always keeping in mind the relationships that, like how in your design, thinking about the relationships that people might build with the plants and animals and other beings that are there. So yeah, so how I think about it.
Yeah. Do y'all have, I guess, like, what are your experiences too with like helping people like connect to nature and getting them to like be involved with the programming?
Well, we end up designing a lot of gardens for people who Austin is maybe their second home, and who may not be spending that much time in the city, let alone outside of their house when they're in the city. So I think that it's important to acknowledge, I liked how you talked about looking at a landscape as a big picture. So in my mind, the difference between landscape and gardening is that gardening is looking at a piece of the landscape, or messing with a piece of the landscape, and thinking about landscaping is painting an area. So looking at the bigger picture, and for many people, that is their involvement with nature, the natural world, or elements of our work, is that they want to look at it through the frame of their window. They want to see it presented to them as a whole. And maybe they're not as interested in the big thing, and maybe that's okay. Maybe they want to see the big swath, and someone else is going to be fascinated with the little piece. And maybe that's just two types of people in the world, and we can cater to both of them.
So I used to run a after-school program called the Emerging Environmentalists. My daughter's actually here, and she was part of the group. And there are these like elementary school kids. I would take them out every Friday afternoon after school ended. And these kids had been sitting for hours in a classroom. And so you can imagine their energy, their pent up energy. And I would take them outside, and oftentimes it would be a lot of, okay, yes, you can climb that tree. Yes, you can pick up that rock. Yes, you can, like, you know, hit those sticks together. That's fine. And just allowing them to engage with nature in the way that they needed to, allowing them to, you know, like meeting them where they were, and then broadening their horizons beyond that, because some of these kids were very excited about nature. Some of them were scared and were frightened by insects. And I had to talk with them about like, hey, these are just, you know, these are part of the ecosystem that we exist in. And we're sharing it with them and, you know, showing them that like these creatures, even wasps, for the most part, are really of no danger to us as long as we're not bothering them. And so like that was something that I really enjoyed doing for a period of time, for about a year. And then also like working at the NA and doing this series called The Naturalists at the NA speaker series. I bring in different types of speakers, like foragers. I love that you were talking about foraging. Like we bring in different speakers and they engage the public on different aspects of the natural world. But I mean, specifically foraging, that's one of the best ways for people to engage with the landscape and help them like really, you know, understand the value there in a tangible way, that when they can like pick up, you know, something that is just naturally growing in the landscape and see that it is an edible product, they then in turn see how valuable that landscape that surrounds that plant is. Because without that landscape, that plant would not exist.
Can I just add briefly?
Yes, please.
Actually, that's how I really got interested in gardening too, was what can you eat? Because I just thought that was the coolest thing. It's like free food out there. But I wanted to also just, I feel like gardening can be the gateway drug to nature. For these people that are scared of nature, that you can go into a beautiful space that's cultivated, that's safe, hopefully. And then once people can become comfortable in that kind of a situation, then maybe they're more inclined to take a walk on a, you know, trail somewhere. And then maybe that starts feeling comfortable and then maybe they want to go camping. And so, you know, people will stop at whatever level they're interested in, but I think that that is setting people on that path to exploring more and feeling more comfortable and connected with the natural world.
Yeah, and that, I mean, you went on to like my next question, which again was like open to everyone, but it's like, these are different levels of like accessibility, which can, you know, we can go in all sorts of directions with accessibility, but thinking, you mentioned like, thinking of these spaces of like transition spaces, like during our previous conversation. Yeah, like, do y'all find that, I mean, I'm assuming yes, because you're talking about it already, but like, thinking about like, the gardens that we're creating as transition spaces, like, is that something that you're actively doing in the work that you do?
Yeah, one thing I think about a lot and connect it to accessibility is when, just for a specific example, there was a community garden plot that I was a part of for a really long time. And one of the really important things for me in the design of it, besides just growing and experimenting with growing vegetables, was the paths. I really wanted them to be clear of plants and wide and just spacious, so that I felt comfortable going in and so that other people felt comfortable going in. And then again, just like speaking to just that fear that some people can have about insects, about plants touching them, those kinds of things, and wanting to make sure that through design, you're also thinking about keeping people safe and comfortable. Yeah.
We do a lot of hardscape work with the goal of moving people around space. So exactly what you were talking about, Bindu, when like you have a pathway directly out of your back door, you're more likely to go into your backyard. If you have stepping stones, it's not only a dry day that you can use your yard, you can use it on the wet days too. And so little tweaks to the structure of the natural world gives allowance for there to be zones where plants are accessible to people without it being a project to get to them. And also I think designing, if people are more comfortable with the indoors, designing the outdoors to mimic the indoors is not a bad idea. So I think that with yards, restaurant courtyards, hospitality, the application is universal. Anytime you're wearing fancy shoes and you don't want to get them dirty, the answer doesn't always have to be not going outside. So
I love.
hardscaping goes a long way, and we try to fine line, because on one hand, of course, we don't want to disturb too much of the natural world, but on the other hand, if we don't disturb the natural world and create areas where it's welcoming to people, they don't ever get there. They only get there on their dirty shoes days, or it doesn't get taken care of, or it doesn't get utilized, or nothing gets harvested, or, you know, so I think it goes back to speaking about the goals that each individual has for their interaction with the native world or the natural world. So, you know, if your goal is to have a cocktail on your porch, let's make that happen for you. If your goal is to be able to pick flowers every day, let's make that happen for you. If your goal is to watch hummingbirds through your window, well, that's a different yard setup. Like, that's a different landscape setup. We'll design to that.
I really love that, and it kind of like circles back to this like the fact that we need goals for these gardens, right? It's like what do we want to get out of it? And I love that you're talking about like accessing nature through the different senses. And Andrea, I know that you do a lot of that work as well. We talked about that. Can you tell our community like a little bit about how you do that through the programming at the Wildflower Center?
I think the most dynamic gardens are the ones that engage as many of the senses as possible. You know, we're very clued in on how a garden looks, which makes sense because, you know, we can all of us who have eyesight can access that pretty easily. We can smell things, you know, we want things, you know, flowers that smell really lovely, or even foliage that smells really interesting, and that engages us on another level. You know, obviously smells can really trigger really deep emotions, which help us connect with our past and with our current present situation. Hearing things, I think it's really important to just, you know, not necessarily a full meditation, but just take a moment to just stop and listen and hear what you can hear, you know. And sometimes you're listening to the birds and, you know, the whir of the hummingbirds, but then you might start distinguishing between the different cricket sounds, and or maybe it's the traffic, you know. But then just to be aware of what those sounds are, I just think that's pretty interesting, and that makes it a richer experience. Touching things, you know, we have fuzzy plants, we have spiky plants, we have rough plants, and experiencing things that way, or just feeling the breeze on your face, or how hot it is and you're sweating and the sweat's trickling down your back, you know, that engages you in a real visceral kind of way. And then lastly, not leastly, is the, you know, tasting things and being, you know, how cool would it be to have, you know, a beautiful ornamental native plant garden that has a lot of things that you can eat. You know, maybe you can pull a few chili pekins off that cute little plant, throw them in your scrambled eggs, or, you know, chew on some grapes, you know, whatever. And I think that the more you can engage, the more connected you're going to feel, and the richer your, I think you can even extend that into other parts of your life, that you can, you know, start sensing things in your fullest way.
Amazing. And I don't have this question in like the questions that I sent you before the panel, but do you each like have a garden at home? And like, if so, what is like one of your favorite things about it? And if not, what, whenever you go into like public gardens, what is like one thing that you're always like, I wonder if they have this thing, or, you know, that you just like notice right away?
I'm terrible. I notice right away when people leave the tags on their plants. That's a mini pearl. And my garden at home is where things go to die. I am fully capable of keeping a garden alive, but I do it all day at work. So anything that is too ugly or sick to survive in our clients' gardens comes to my house. So no one wants to see my garden.
It's a rehabilitation center. I want to play.
I actually have too many gardens. Way too many. So I have a garden at home that surrounds my front yard. We have like a border around it just to make it a little more buttoned up and not so wild looking. But I've got a ton of inland sea oats in there because I have full shade in my front yard, and so I have to work around that. And honestly, it's not really, I shouldn't say work around it. It is a benefit to have full shade because it really does open my horizons to what does bloom, what looks beautiful in full shade. And so I have a lot of inland sea oats, and also some Turk's cap and some other plants that are scattered around that area. And then I have my garden at Sunshine Community Gardens, which is food crops. I have some corn that's currently being eaten by grackles. And I got a whole natives patch in the front, which is full sun, and so I can do all of my favorite flowering plants there, as well as bunching grasses like little bluestem, Sidon's grandma, all that jazz. And then I have 2 gardens in front of the Baker Center, which are woefully not being watered, and we won't talk about that right now. And then I have a 4th garden in front of my daughter's school. That's actually,
Sounds you are busy.
I'm really busy. I'm like driving all
You're
the
never
time.
indoors, actually.
No, the tan line is real. But that is a natives patch, and I actually got a grant from the Native Plant Society of Central Texas, $600 to plant that all out with native, and it's beautiful, it's thriving, and it's bringing in a ton of pollinators. I'm very proud of that space, and it brings beauty to not just me, but to all the kids that pass by it. They see these native plants, their parents see it, and I think it's a really great way to promote what you could do in a space that is full sun, that it can still look beautiful and thriving.
That's really lovely. For me, my garden, my home garden is my paradise. I feel like when I go out there, it's a space that I have created largely in conjunction collaboration with nature. And it's better than TV, just going out there and seeing what's happening. Last night, there was a scorpion on our front porch eating a June bug. I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. Nature, yes, that's a pretty good plot right there. Not that I really want scorpions, but yeah, I love being enveloped in a space where it's sort of a fantasy land. I like to fantasize even as a kid of creating my own space, and a garden is largely that. But I can't stress enough how much it is definitely a collaboration, because gardeners, we do not have full control, as you all know, and so. It's kind of interesting to see what happens. It's also a big experiment, and I've killed lots of plants too, and that's how you learn. I mean, not that you're inheriting, healthy plants, but but I've killed a lot of healthy plants too. Gardens full.
Yeah, and for me, I have a porch and a lot of potted plants. And just speaking of experimentation, it's just been a huge experiment, because I've been trying out growing cucumbers in a pot, and grapes, and different native flowers. So it's been interesting to see what will happen. And I think when I had a community garden, one of my favorite plants that we grew was yarrow and pansies and even garlic chives. They were just really a hot spot for pollinators. So it was always really fun when going to the garden, to see the different pollinators that were there. I love bumblebees, especially, and seeing them fall asleep in flowers.
I've seen photos of that, and it's so adorable. Oh, go ahead.
We have chickens at our house, and so anything that dies or gets weeded, or even some herbaceous refuse from our company goes to the chickens, and watching chickens take down a pile of weeds is the most joyful thing. 10 out of 10 recommend. They're the goofiest little dinosaurs. It's real fun. And so they help us with bug control and provide compost for us at no extra charge. And so yeah, if you have the space for it, 10 out of 10 recommend chickens.
When we go back to this idea of collaboration, right? It's a teamwork. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation, so I wanted to open it up to the audience if anybody has a question for one of our panelists. Now is the time. Sure.
So we're gonna talk about weeds, so, I ran I ran an events company for a long time, and I'm now caring for organic vegetables. So I'm learning a lot and trying to learn about soil and regenerative agriculture. And so I'm hoping that maybe weeds are getting to be okay, and people are kind of looking at what they can bring to the garden, and are there goods and bad ones, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with them, and try not to do the standard thing of getting rid of old soil, bringing in, sterilized compost, and then planting your bushes, and letting a little bit of Queen Anne's lace or whatever be here and there. So, would love to hear your ideas on weeds.
Thank you for the question.
I'm happy to jump in on that. So whether a weed is tolerable or not is somewhat up to you and what that weed does in your landscape, and what a weed is pretty wishy-washy also, just the definition of a weed. To me, it's a plant that's growing where you don't want it. So it could even be a bluebonnet that's growing in the wrong place, then you might take it out. That's maybe not gonna happen, but it could happen. And I think, some weeds are more destructive than others. Like I think of the hedge parsley that has little, seed ticks that stick in your clothes. They're not native, they're an invasive species that are really annoying to have in your landscape. So I try to get rid of those. One of the first things I do. Mulch is good to do. That helps with suppressing weeds. Even better than just bark mulch or something would be a green mulch or a living mulch, which would be using plants as a weed barrier. Depending on what your goals are, you might decide to plant something like frog fruit, which is very tight and really very good at pushing out other weeds, but it also can be pretty rampant. But there may be other species that would work well in your situation that can help keep the weeds down.
When you say plant mulch, you mean living plants?
Yeah, like using a ground cover of some sort. Yeah, that would help suppress the weeds. I think mulch, like bark mulch, is good when you're first planting. And then if you can design your space that you'll have plants that'll eventually grow and fill in those gaps, that's ideal. And then use the plants themselves. That's what nature does.
Other than frog, would you recommend it?
Yeah, frog fruit is a great one. Horse herb if you're in a shady spot. Right now, we didn't plant it, but there's bacopa all over our garden right now, and that's a useful plant as well as a very short ground cover that grows between our vegetables. Our vegetable garden is a very cultivated space, so it's hard to get things to, we're moving things around a lot. It's a lot of disturbed space every season, and so it's harder to establish some of those things, but yeah, there's a lot of options.
Thank you.
I also love portulaca for that. It's a crawling succulent type thing, and it flowers. And certain varieties of it are edible as well. And it thrives through the heat of Texas summer, whereas a lot of other weeds are more fair weather and they'll fade and turn to sticker burrs or pokey sticks. In the heat of the summer, the portulaca will just stay. Trailing lantana is another thing that does well to cover a lot of ground and keep some moisture in and survives the heat of the summer.
And I also promote legumes of any variety because it feeds back into the soil. Legumes, they've got like this symbiotic relationship with diazotropes, which are like bacteria that exist within most soils, and the roots will actually attract those diazotropes, which then convert like nitrogen that's bound up with itself. It's a triple bonded nitrogen. It will take that nitrogen, break it apart in like for some like sugars from plants, And then that turns into plant food. It feeds back into the plant, and then you leave the plant roots in the ground. You do a chop and drop when you're ready to like turn that under. You leave the roots, you leave the leaves, and it feeds right back into that soil. And so it turns into nitrogen for you, which is a really great way to feed your plants, but also like shade out the ground. And it's living mulch, which is wonderful.
What type of lagoon do you use?
I would prefer using any type of bun-shaped lagoon. But if you want to do it real cheap, you can just go to your local grocery store, go to the bulk section and grab some beans, and those will work too.
I have a magic trick. There's this idea that's called time sharing, and this is an idea that I've stolen from Tom Keyes, who is a gardener. And the idea here is that you use two, sometimes more, but basically two different plants in the same garden location, and then alternate the seasons that have alternating actively growing seasons. So for example, you might have the wax mallow Turk's cap, and they're lovely all summer, but then in the wintertime, you get a freeze, they go to the ground and you cut them back, and then you have bare soil or mulch. But if you can combine them with something like the giant spiderwort, the spiderwort there is growing all throughout the winter. It bolts and blooms in the spring. And then in the summertime or early summer, it melts, goes completely dormant, and that's when the wax mallow starts taking over. So you can use multiple species in the same location. And not only is that visually more interesting to us as people, but it also provides a richer habitat for pollinators and other wildlife as well. So I mentioned that I have my book. I was hoping to sell a few today, but there was some complications with that. But if you want at the break, you can come up and look at my copy. But I talk about some of those things. The book is Texas Native Plant Primer, and it's a gardening book for native plants in Texas. So some of these things I've written about. So
Are there pictures?
there are lots of pictures. Yeah, you have to have pictures in a gardening book.
I just wanted to mention one other thing.
Oh, sure.
I loved what you were saying about also just living with the weeds and finding uses for them. Because I think, many weeds are introduced, they're from around the world, but they're, kind of now a part of this community in North America. And so I think it's also important to learn about them and research about, like, in the context of where they're from, how were they used, and kind of develop that understanding of their value and to appreciate them. And yes, you may not want them in your garden, but you can at least understand more about them too.
And that was a question that I didn't get to in our conversation, but we were talking about novel ecosystems, and that was a new term for me. Anybody want to expand on that?
So a novel ecosystem is a ecosystem that is changing over time, as we are all very aware that climate change is a very real thing. Then novel ecosystems are now, it is an idea that an ecosystem that exists right now is going to be changed at some point, so much so in the future that you will have new types of plants that exist within that space, and it will just inherently change over time. And I am of two minds about that. I don't disagree with that term or the idea behind it, that we have to have an acceptance of new species coming in and filling roles in a ecosystem that will be void at some point in the future, because plants will not be able, certain plants will not be able to exist in our changing climate. But I also feel like it's important to be really careful about how if we're going to assist in any kind of introduction of a species, to really understand what we are putting into that space, because so many of our native species are important because they support pollinators, specifically caterpillars or other insects that are using that as a food source for their babies. And insects are powerhouse foods for baby birds. And so without these specific plants within the ecosystem, then you're missing a big component to our bird population. And we have seen massive declines in insect population as well as bird declines. And so like, it really depends on the plant and the situation. It's very muddy. But yeah, so that's what essentially a novel ecosystem is that we have a new environment that we all have to adapt to.
Excuse me.
Let me go with you and then.
Thank you for the shout out to the master naturalists. I'm in the Balcones Canyonlands groups. Sorry. So Austin has 2 chapters, and if you find yourself like wanting to do volunteer activities, that's a really good place. And in fact, pollinator gardens are one of the specialties of our chapters. Yeah. So I'm interested in thinking about gardens as a kind of I don't know, an idealized space, as a sort of interface between the wilderness and like cultivated, or the built environment and the grown environment, or the wild environment. Love to hear what your thoughts are about that being kind of an interface. There's a lot of poetic gestures toward the garden, or in literature, toward the garden as a really idealized space, and how that maybe thinking about it in that way informs your decisions about which plants to choose, or maybe what kind of design decisions get made.
I'll chime in real quick. I think I recently like acquired a little garden, and so I'm trying to like decide what to put on it. And some of the things that I'm thinking about is like how can I support like the local ecosystems? And so I've been choosing like a lot of like viney, like flowering plants to help with pollinators. But also in thinking of like plants that like trace back to like my childhood, or like my yeah, just like what sort of things, smells, like sights are going to trigger like memories for me. And just thinking about like memory health, if you will, for myself. So that's I guess maybe like a combination of like understanding wild spaces and like what can survive without like too much watering, or you know, partial sun, partial shade, and but also like bringing in like my own identity and like personality into the garden to create the sort of like maybe idealized space in my head, at least.
And I still cut grass the other day and thought, and it just like evoked all these memories from many years. It's really amazing.
Yeah, and if anyone's getting triggered by the smell of jasmine, that is part of what Aisha, the artist of the show, has like created as like the atmosphere for the exhibition.
I guess in part, my question was inspired by this work, because it's just so
Building idealized spaces, for sure.
I think one of the wonderful challenges of designing gardens for other people is that the term an idealized space really hit a note. Everybody has their own idea of what is wonderful, and I think that not everyone has the ability to express what it is that they're envisioning. And so they tend to use broad terms like green or flowering or native. And that doesn't necessarily distill their particular vision. And so one of the things that I really enjoy in my job, I love words, I don't know if you can tell, is that I get the opportunity to play this like choose your own adventure game, trying to like suss out the meaning of what it is that they love and why they love it, and what is ideal to them and what is acceptable to them and what is unacceptable. Like, you know, are you a steel dish person? Are you a wooden box person? Are you a pink and yellow flowers only person? Do you know that about yourself? Do you want to touch it? Do you want to smell it? Do you want to taste it? Like, what's interesting and what's not interesting, and playing like narrowing down to like, okay, and then is this what you had in mind? Is really fun and gratifying, and it feels like getting somebody to tell you their secrets every time.
We're like a garden. I wanted to add to the idea of an idyllic garden. My little piece of reality here, practical. It also, because this is what I do for a living, my job is to walk around the Wildflower Center and look at all the things that need to happen. And it can be a real bummer sometimes. You know, I mean, I think people come and they're like, oh, it's so beautiful here. I'm like, I wish I could see it with your eyes. And I think that sometimes, you know, I try not to do this in my own garden. I'm getting paid to do that at work, but in my own garden, I'm trying to let go of that and let it be an idyllic garden, even if it's not perfect, because you will never achieve perfection anyway. Anyway, that's just my little reality check.
I just love that you mentioned that, because it's like, when you know your plant community and you are not plant blind and you walk into that space, like I walk into the and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of trumpet vine. And that's native, and I'm just like, it's there. And it's very hard to get out. And so, but people walk through who are not as like attuned to it as I am, or like as, not even attuned. Yeah, they have different ideas. Exactly. That is a much nicer way to put it, that I have a very set idea in my head as to what I want in this space. And it is such a large space, and it is wild. There are wild aspects to it. There's only so much control that I can have. And so it's a good way to remind myself that I have to relinquish that control. And I feel like gardening is very therapeutic in that aspect.
And humbling.
Yes, very humbling.
Yeah, and also when you mentioned idealized gardens, it made me think about how gardens can be such a great place of cultural connection and kind of romanticizing what your home. I think about my dad, who's from the Caribbean, and in his garden he plants a lot of peppers and greens that are all from Jamaica. And so that's really important to him, and make it his version of an idealized garden. I think, that's a really great way to connect to yourself and your heritage, and what you were saying too, all the sensory experiences that you have in being in a garden.
Definitely. We'll move on to the final question. You had a question, right?
Well, it's not a question. It just makes me think a couple of terms that have been used. And one is the novel ecosystem and the pluses of it. I've gardened in my place for 32 years. It's out in the wildland interface, and it's wildland interface in my space. And one thing over the years, I've built it up over the years, built the house and disturbed the land incredibly. And a lot of the interventions I've made in between, there was a whole hill of seed muley that grew, and most of it disappeared during the construction time. And over time, as I've introduced new things, they have sprung up in so many places. They love this area. And I bring in plants that are natives, and they just go wild. And so the novel ecosystem has been at my place over decades. And it's really, gardening is delight, joy, delight, and heartbreak with it. It's changed a lot because a lot died in the snowpocalypse or the ice storm and all those sorts of things. But it's those things that you don't intend that can be even better sometimes than the things that you do intend. And
That's really lovely.
yeah.
Yeah, it's about learning, right? And understanding like what your relationship is to the land.
Could everybody hear the comment about it?
Oh,
That it's the learning about like novel ecosystems and understanding like things that that will survive and what things won't. It's just, you said that there's love, there's heartbreak, there's like learning. Yeah, I was just thinking how much that is like a relationship. So
it is. That's a thing. It's a family. It's part of my
Yeah.
family.
I'd love to introduce to you guys the concept of pessimistic gardening. Hear me out. If you expect the worst, you're always pleasantly surprised. So as a gardener, you're the steward of living things, and part of life is death. So not everything is going to make it. And so if you expect it not to, if you're like, hey, let's try it, see what happens, then you give yourself the opportunity around every corner to be thrilled when things do work. So expect it to fail and have the opportunity over and over again to be thrilled.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna say at Christmas, I bought 4 poinsettias for each one of my children and, I thought, by spring, all the leaves fell off and I just kept watering them, so now they're in full bloom, but green. And this friend of mine is the head of the Orchid Society, she says, oh, there's some kind of light put on it around fall and then they turn red, so I figured that out. So they didn't die, they came back.
No, they don't die, and I quit buying them because they won't die. Kind of with Valentine.
Ian, weren't you pleasantly surprised?
They relook, so now in the fall, I'll do this little trick where the leaves turn red.
It'll be a good chance for experimenting with the light. Well, I want to thank you to all of our panelists for such an informative conversation today. And thank you all for coming out to Women and Their Work and spending your Saturday with us. I want to give a special thanks to Women and Their Work staff and Diane, Jordan, and Chris, who make programs like this possible. Our incredible interns, Maddie and Reese, who are helping today. Our exhibiting artist, Aisha Imdad, for coming from Houston, driving in today. And if y'all want a chance to talk with her about her work, like today is the day. And finally, to our dedicated volunteers, Daniel for helping with today's event. And you mentioned Joy is here. Is she here?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, Joy is the room. Yes, right
Oh,
there.
awesome.
And she's going to be helping with identifying plants for anybody who's going to be partaking in the plant swap afterwards.
Thank you so much, Joy. The plant swap will be taking place outside. As some of y'all have seen, we have some tables out there where you can put your plants if you haven't already. And if whether you brought a plant or not, I encourage you to stick around and connect with some other plant and nature lovers. I also brought like extra plants, so everybody hopefully will be able to take a little something with them today. Our panelists have contributed to a list of resources. We have a little handout at the tables. If you would like to receive that list via email, it does contain a lot of links to the things listed. So I'm happy to send that to you. Just be sure you sign up out there, and we might put it on the exhibition website as well. And finally, if you are not already, and this is maybe your first time or you haven't been too involved with Women and Their Work, consider becoming a member. Your support allows us to host panels and other programming at no cost to the public. And yeah, we're just supporting arts and the arts ecosystem as well. So again, thank you all so much. And yeah, I'll see you out the